Donald Trump's lawyers say he's been unable to obtain a bond for the $454 million he owes as part of a civil fraud judgment against him, his eldest sons and his company. He's asking a New York State appeals court to pause the judgment against him while he appeals. Well, let's cross live now to New York and speak to our North America correspondent, Neda Tawfik, who is there for us. Neda, what exactly is this all about?
Yeah, well, Miriam, when Donald Trump was ordered to pay these massive amounts in 2 consecutive civil judgments, many questioned if he had the cash to do it. Now, earlier this month, he did post a $91.6 million bond in the E. Jean Carroll defamation case. But as you said there, today his lawyers have said he's been unable to obtain a bond in the much larger civil business fraud judgment against him.
All right, people, welcome back to Jack Mockler. Swiss banking secrecy, the legendary system that allowed the ultra-wealthy to hide assets from the U.S., is being systematically dismantled by the most aggressive enforcement campaign in American legal history. The implications for Donald Trump and anyone who relied on this secrecy are absolutely devastating. Let me start with a crucial clarification because honest coverage requires precision. There is no verified public report in which Swiss banks have specifically exposed Trump-named hidden accounts to American prosecutors. No smoking gun document showing Trump's specific Swiss account numbers being handed over to the DOJ. That specific expose scenario is the most dramatically immediate reading of the headline, but it's not the
Now, just for the viewers to understand, a bond company basically takes on the responsibility for any payout if a defendant loses on appeal and is unable to pay. And according to Donald Trump's lawyers, getting a bond has been a practical impossibility for them. They say they've reached out to 30 companies, that very few will even consider giving him a bond that large at $454 million, and that others won't accept his real estate as collateral. They'll only accept cash or stocks. So he is asking the New York State Appeals Court to pause the judgment against him while he appeals. Now, if he's not granted that pause, and if he truly doesn't have the cash to secure that bond, well then, Miriam, the Attorney General, Letitia James, could ask a judge to start seizing his
documented accountability reality. What is documented is something arguably more significant and certainly more systematic. The entire Swiss banking secrecy framework, the specific infrastructure that made it possible for ultra-wealthy Americans to park undeclared assets in Swiss accounts and remain permanently protected, has been practically dismantled through accumulated enforcement mechanisms that are now actively and currently operating against anyone with undeclared Swiss assets. The Swiss banking secrecy myth has been one of the most enduring features of global finance for generations. The idea that what happens in Switzerland stays in Switzerland. The specific confidentiality framework that made Swiss banks the go-to destination for anyone who wanted to keep their
assets. You know, her office has said he has until March 25th to put up the entire amount of the judgment, or she will start trying to collect.
Neda, thank you very much indeed. Neda Tawfik there in New York for us.
The White House denies there are any conflicts of interest in Donald Trump's business dealings after new disclosures showed he made more than $1 billion from cryptocurrency ventures. The filings for 2025 show much of the money came from the sale of tokens by a firm co-founded by his own sons and the children of his special envoy, Steve Witkoff. The president once described cryptocurrency as a haven for scammers and drug dealers before embracing its potential shortly before his re-election. He's since advanced policies to relax its regulation. CBS News correspondent Jared Hill.
Money hidden from tax authorities, creditors, or anyone else who might want to know where the money was and how much there was. That framework has been under assault for years, but the assault has now reached a level of completeness that genuinely constitutes a worst nightmare scenario for anyone who still has undeclared assets in Swiss accounts. Let me take you through the enforcement timeline because understanding the progression is essential for understanding why this moment is so significant. The first major crack came with the UBS settlement, a $780 million criminal resolution that established that even the most systemically important Swiss bank could be held accountable for helping Americans evade taxes. That settlement was the first domino, the opening of a door
Told us about the reaction in the US to those investments.
Well, so it depends on who you talk to, obviously, with many of the things dealing with President Trump. On one hand, there are Democrats who have raised questions, not necessarily around the legality of this, because it is legal for a president to invest in various companies, but there are questions about, from their perspective, the ethics of this, especially with President Trump pushing policies that would deregulate or maintain low regulation over the crypto industry. Some of them asking if there are ways that there could be more guardrails put on all of this. It's also interesting, there was a survey done just back in May of this year that said a majority of Americans are uncomfortable with President Trump's handling of the crypto industry, although that it was something of a low priority for the majority.
that has now been thrown completely open. Then came the Swiss bank program, a formal mechanism established by the DOJ giving Swiss banks a path to disclose U.S.-linked undeclared accounts in exchange for non-prosecution agreements. That program didn't just punish past conduct. It created a forward-looking compliance obligation that fundamentally transformed how Swiss banks operate. Then came the Credit Suisse Senate investigation, which revealed that the bank had helped more than 22,000 U.S. clients conceal Swiss accounts through shell companies, no paper trail practices, and hidden statements delivered inside Sports Illustrated magazines to avoid detection. 22,000 U.S. clients. That's not a handful of wealthy individuals.
Majority of them.
And what are the Republicans doing about this? Anyone looking into the figures and saying what's going on?
Well, when it comes to the money itself, I think from what we've seen, at least at this point, there is less of a question about whether this is something that, whether, they're cooking the books or if there's something nefarious happening from the financial aspect of it. But there have been some lawmakers on both sides of the political spectrum that have looked to try and rein in the ability of people who are elected officials from making money from things like the stock market and potentially finding some different ways to regulate the crypto industry. But this has really been something that Republicans have gotten.
That's a systematic, large-scale operation designed to keep American money hidden from American authorities. And those specific documented practices, shell companies, no paper trails, hidden statements delivered in magazines, represent the most alarming available description of the Swiss banking secrecy infrastructure at its most sophisticated and most comprehensive. But here's where this gets truly devastating and genuinely alarming. In 2025, Credit Suisse Services AG pleaded guilty to criminal charges. The bank admitted that from 2010 to 2021, it knowingly helped U.S. taxpayers maintain undeclared offshore accounts, hide real ownership, falsify documents, and conceal more than $4 billion in assets. Simultaneously, the bank breached its 2014 plea agreement, the prior resolution that was supposed to have settled its criminal exposure. The bank violated the specific commitments it had made to resolve its prior criminal liability. That breach of a prior plea agreement is the most alarming single element of this entire accountability development, because it establishes that the 2014 resolution was not a durable settlement, but a violated commitment whose breach directly triggered additional penalties, additional disclosure obligations, and additional enforcement cooperation requirements. And then there's the forward-looking disclosure obligation, the specific commitment Credit Suisse made to identify and disclose all future traceable hidden U.S. accounts to American authorities. This is the most alarming future accountability dimension, establishing that the Swiss banking secrecy framework is now actively working in reverse for any U.S. person whose undeclared Swiss assets are identified through the enforcement mechanism. Swiss banks that used to protect your secrets are now obligated to find your money and tell the U.S. government about it. That's the system now. That's the reality. The 2025 indictment of 4 Swiss bankers is another critical piece of this story. These specific bank employees were charged with helping U.S. taxpayers hide assets through secret Swiss accounts, maintaining thousands of undeclared U.S. accounts with up to $3 billion in assets. and advising clients on how to structure withdrawals and use offshore cards to evade IRS detection. Individual Swiss bankers being federally indicted for helping U.S. taxpayers evade taxes through secret accounts represents the most alarming individual criminal accountability outcome in the Swiss banking enforcement story. It translates the institutional guilty plea and settlement accountability into the most immediate personal criminal accountability, establishing that the enforcement mechanism is pursuing individual actors rather than merely institutional resolutions. The advising clients on withdrawal structuring and offshore card use dimension establishes that the criminal conduct being charged is the most sophisticated available tax evasion assistance. These weren't simple mistakes or technical violations. This was professional, systematic, deliberate assistance designed to help wealthy Americans avoid detection and avoid paying taxes on their assets. And the fact that these bankers are now facing federal charges means that the enforcement mechanism has teeth. It's not just going after banks with settlements. It's going after the individuals who made the concealment possible. Now, I need to address the Swiss corruption episode and Trump's specific connection to this story because it's the most directly available accountability grounding for the headline. Swiss Green parliamentarians filed a criminal complaint mentioning Trump's name in connection with a specific Swiss corruption episode. Trump's name appears in a specific formal Swiss legal proceeding filed by Swiss parliamentarians. That specific intersection, Trump's name appearing in a specific formal Swiss criminal complaint, is the most directly available accountability documentation establishing why the Swiss banks exposed Trump framing is as directly applicable to the specific accountability landscape as any framing can be. It is not the exposé hidden accounts in the most dramatically immediate form that the most alarming reading imagines, but it is the documented appearance of Trump's name in the Swiss accountability landscape most urgently establishing the accountability credibility of the worst nightmare framing in its most completely grounded real-world accountability application. Trump's name is in the Swiss legal record. That's a documented fact. And that fact, combined with the systematic dismantling of Swiss banking secrecy, creates an accountability picture that should be genuinely alarming to anyone who has undeclared Swiss assets. Let me walk you through the specific enforcement mechanisms that have created this worst nightmare scenario, because understanding the architecture of the dismantling is essential for understanding why it's so comprehensive and so permanent. The DOJ Swiss Bank program is the most systematically comprehensive available enforcement architecture. It gave Swiss banks a formal path to disclose U.S.-linked undeclared accounts in exchange for non-prosecution agreements requiring them to notify the department, fully disclose cross-border activities, provide account-by-account U.S. owner data, support treaty requests, close non-compliant accounts, and pay heavy penalties. This program didn't merely punish specific prior conduct. It established the specific forward-looking compliance infrastructure requiring Swiss banks to actively identify and disclose all U.S.-linked hidden accounts as an ongoing compliance obligation. The institutional transformation is the key to understanding why this matters so much. The Swiss banking secrecy framework has been converted from a protective shield for undeclared U.S. assets into an active disclosure mechanism whose specific ongoing operation threatens the continuing secrecy of any undeclared U.S. assets maintained through Swiss banking channels. The system that used to protect your secrets is now actively looking for them to tell the U.S. government. The bank that used to help you hide your money is now required to find it and report it. The 2014 Senate investigation into Credit Suisse revealed that the bank helped more than 22,000 U.S. clients conceal Swiss accounts through shell companies, no paper trail practices, and hidden statements delivered inside Sports Illustrated magazines to avoid detection. That specific documented practice, hiding financial statements inside magazines, is almost unbelievable in its audacity. These were not amateur efforts at concealment. This was a professional, systematic operation designed to keep American money hidden from American authorities. And the Senate investigation exposed it comprehensively. The 22,000 U.S. clients figure is the most alarming historical scale dimension to this story. 22,000 wealthy Americans, according to the Senate investigation, were actively concealing assets in Switzerland through Credit Suisse alone. That's one bank, one period, one set of documented practices. The scale of the concealment was enormous. The system was robust. And the fact that it was exposed means that the accountability mechanisms worked, at least in this case, to reveal what had been hidden. The specific DOJ documentation establishing that Swiss bank plea deals and non-prosecution agreements provide no immunity to individual U.S. account holders is the most directly alarming single accountability fact for anyone with undeclared Swiss accounts. Let me be absolutely clear about what this means. When a Swiss bank settles with the DOJ, when it pays hundreds of millions of dollars and agrees to cooperate, that resolution protects the bank. It does not protect the individual account holders whose undeclared assets the bank was concealing. The bank provides account-level data to U.S. prosecutors as part of its institutional resolution, and that data can be directly used against the individual U.S. account holders whose undeclared assets establish the criminal tax liability relevant to any individual's worst nightmare accountability exposure. No immunity for individuals means the account-level data the banks are providing to U.S. prosecutors can be directly used against the account holders. The banks get resolutions. The account holders get criminal exposure. That's the accountability reality. That's what makes this a worst nightmare scenario. You thought you were protected because your bank was cooperating. You thought the settlement shielded you. It doesn't. The banks are giving up your information to save themselves, and the DOJ is using that information to pursue you. The specific 2025 Senate Finance Committee finding that Credit Suisse failed to disclose thousands of previously undeclared U.S. accounts with over $1.3 billion is another critical piece of this story. The committee found that Credit Suisse breached its 2014 plea deal by not disclosing thousands of accounts it was supposed to have identified and reported. That specific finding triggered the additional enforcement pressure whose specific result was the 2025 guilty plea and the forward-looking disclosure obligation. A Senate Finance Committee finding that a prior plea deal was breached is the legislative accountability trigger most directly producing the additional enforcement pressure whose result is the most severe available escalation of institutional criminal accountability. The escalation produced by that trigger, the 2025 guilty plea, the forward-looking disclosure obligation, and the additional enforcement cooperation requirements, is the most recent and most actively alarming chapter of the Swiss banking accountability story. And its current term status establishes that the worst nightmare framing is as actively relevant as any current accountability development can be in its most specifically current term, accountability application. This is not some historical story about past misconduct. This is an active, ongoing enforcement mechanism that is currently operating. The guilty plea is from 2025. The indictments are from 2025. The forward-looking disclosure obligation is currently operative. This is happening right now. The Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty mechanism is the specific legal infrastructure enabling U.S. prosecutors to request Swiss account information for any identified U.S. person. Requests from U.S. prosecutors to Swiss authorities for account-level data are the formal legal mechanism enabling the exposé hidden accounts accountability outcome. The legal availability is as practically achievable as the specific most recent Swiss enforcement cooperation commitments most directly established in the specific bank's forward-looking disclosure obligation. The commitment to identify and disclose all future traceable hidden U.S. accounts to American authorities is the operative accountability mechanism, whose ongoing operation converts the MLAT treaty request mechanism from a case-by-case investigative tool into an active, ongoing disclosure obligation. The specific most alarming available accountability truth is that the Swiss banking secrecy infrastructure, whose prior protection of undeclared U.S. assets was the most consequentially available offshore financial concealment framework, is now the most systematically compromised available secrecy infrastructure in the modern international tax enforcement record. It's not just that the system has been weakened, it's been systematically dismantled. It's been transformed into something that works against the very people it was designed to protect. The system that was supposed to keep your secrets hidden is now actively looking for your secrets to reveal them. The no individual immunity dimension is the specific, most alarming single accountability fact whose honest delivery transforms the framing from an alarming abstract accountability claim into the most practically threatening available accountability reality for any U.S. person most directly dependent on Swiss banking secrecy for concealment. If you have undeclared assets in Swiss accounts, the banks are obligated to find them and report them. The plea deals protect the banks, not you. The account-level data is being provided to U.S. prosecutors, and that data can be used against you. That's not a hypothetical scenario. That's the current operative enforcement framework. Now let me bring all of this together because the full picture here is genuinely alarming and demands honest engagement. The Swiss banking enforcement story represents the systematic dismantling of the most consequentially available offshore financial concealment infrastructure in the world. The UBS $780 million settlement established the first major crack. The Swiss bank program extended the disclosure obligation systematically. The Credit Suisse Senate investigation revealed 22,000 U.S. clients concealing accounts. The 2025 guilty plea admitted $4 billion in concealed U.S. assets and created the forward-looking disclosure obligation. And the 2025 Swiss banker indictments established individual criminal accountability for the concealment assistance most directly constituting the worst nightmare enforcement framework. The Swiss banking secrecy myth is dismantled. The forward-looking disclosure obligation is active. The no individual immunity accountability fact is documented, and the worst nightmare is as practically threatening as the most alarming accountability framing can describe. Not because any specific Trump-named account has been specifically exposed, but because the Swiss banking secrecy infrastructure, whose prior protection of undeclared U.S. assets was the most consequentially available offshore financial concealment framework, is now the most systematically and most permanently compromised available secrecy infrastructure in the modern international tax enforcement record. The Swiss corruption episode connection to Trump is the specific, most directly available accountability grounding for the headline. Swiss Green parliamentarians filed a criminal complaint mentioning Trump's name in connection with a specific Swiss corruption episode. Trump's name appears in a specific formal Swiss legal proceeding. That specific documented appearance is the most directly available accountability documentation establishing why the worst nightmare framing is as directly applicable to the specific accountability landscape as any framing can be. It's not the exposé hidden accounts in the most dramatically immediate form, but it is the documented appearance of Trump's name in the Swiss accountability landscape most urgently establishing the accountability credibility of the worst nightmare framing. The practical implications of all this are enormous for anyone who has undeclared Swiss assets. The banks are now obligated to find those assets and report them. The account-level data is being provided to U.S. prosecutors. The individual account holders have no immunity. The MLAT treaty request mechanism is actively available, and the enforcement mechanisms are current and active. The UBS settlement, the Swiss bank program, the Credit Suisse guilty plea, the banker indictments, all of it adds up to a comprehensive dismantling of the secrecy infrastructure that used to protect undeclared assets. Trump's worst nightmare is not that the IRS reviews his Florida tax returns. His worst nightmare is that Swiss banks, which spent decades covering for the ultra-rich under plea deals, now have ongoing obligations to hand American prosecutors full account trails. The UBS settlement established the first major crack. The Swiss bank program systematized the disclosure obligation. The 2025 Credit Suisse guilty plea and breach of 2014 plea deal finding created the forward-looking obligation that makes any remaining undeclared U.S. account a ticking accountability clock rather than a permanently protected asset. And the no individual immunity documentation most directly establishes that the institutional resolutions protect the banks, not the account holders. The specific 2025 indictment of 4 Swiss bankers for helping U.S. taxpayers hide assets through secret Swiss accounts, maintaining thousands of undeclared U.S. accounts with up to $3 billion in assets, and advising clients on how to structure withdrawals and use offshore cards to evade IRS detection, is the specific most alarming individual criminal accountability outcome in the Swiss banking enforcement story. Individual Swiss bankers being federally indicted for helping U.S. taxpayers evade taxes through secret accounts is the specific most alarming available individual criminal accountability outcome. It translates the institutional guilty plea and settlement accountability into personal criminal accountability, whose existence establishes that the enforcement mechanism pursues individual actors. The advising clients on withdrawal structuring and offshore card use dimension establishes that the criminal conduct being charged is the most sophisticated available tax evasion assistance. These were not simple mistakes or technical violations. This was professional, systematic, deliberate assistance designed to help wealthy Americans avoid detection and avoid paying taxes on their assets. And the fact that these bankers are now facing federal charges means that the enforcement mechanism has teeth. It's not just going after banks with settlements, it's going after the individuals who made the concealment possible. The specific forward-looking disclosure obligation is the most alarming future accountability dimension. The commitment to identify and disclose all future traceable hidden U.S. accounts to American authorities establishes that the Swiss banking secrecy framework is now actively working in reverse for any U.S. person whose undeclared Swiss assets are identified through the enforcement mechanism. Swiss banks that used to protect your secrets are now obligated to find your money and tell the U.S. government about it. The system has been fundamentally transformed. The protective shield is now an active disclosure mechanism. The MLAT treaty request infrastructure is the specific, most directly applicable legal mechanism dimension to the worst nightmare framing. Requests from U.S. prosecutors to Swiss authorities for specific identified account-level data are the formal legal mechanism most directly enabling the exposé hidden accounts accountability outcome. The legal availability is as practically achievable as the most recent Swiss enforcement cooperation commitments most directly established in the Swiss bank's forward-looking disclosure obligation. The commitment to identify and disclose all future traceable hidden U.S. accounts to American authorities is the operative accountability mechanism, whose ongoing operation converts the MLAT treaty request mechanism from a case-by-case investigative tool into an active, ongoing disclosure obligation. The Swiss banking enforcement story is as alarming as the worst nightmare framing describes. Not because any specific Trump-named hidden account has been specifically identified and exposed, but because the Swiss banking secrecy infrastructure, whose prior protection of undeclared U.S. assets was the most consequentially available offshore financial concealment framework, is now the most systematically and most permanently compromised available secrecy infrastructure in the modern international tax enforcement record. The dismantling is comprehensive. The enforcement mechanisms are active and current. The forward-looking disclosure obligation is operative, and the MLAT treaty request infrastructure is practically accessible and thoroughly established. The UBS figures are on record. The Credit Suisse guilty plea is documented. The 4 Swiss bankers are indicted, and the forward-looking disclosure obligation is operative. That is as alarming as the headline describes. The Swiss banking secrecy system that protected the ultra-wealthy for decades has been systematically dismantled through the most aggressive enforcement campaign in American legal history. The banks are now obligated to disclose. The individuals have no immunity. The account-level data is being provided to prosecutors. and the MLAT mechanism is actively available. For anyone with undeclared assets in Swiss accounts, this is genuinely a worst nightmare scenario. The secrecy is gone. The protection is gone. The system that was designed to hide your money is now designed to find it and report it. And Trump's name appears in the Swiss legal record through a criminal complaint filed by Swiss parliamentarians. That documented fact, combined with the systematic dismantling of Swiss banking secrecy, creates an accountability picture that should be genuinely alarming to anyone who has undeclared Swiss assets. The system that protected the ultra-wealthy is gone. The enforcement mechanisms that replaced it are active and powerful, and the accountability consequences for anyone caught in that system are as severe as any financial enforcement scenario can be. That is the Swiss banking accountability story. The secrecy is dismantled. The disclosure obligations are active. The individual immunity does not exist. And the worst nightmare is not a hypothetical future scenario, but the specific, most currently operative available enforcement framework.